Hello, you are listening to Philip Mollica's Consciousness Evolution. New content is published first at philipmollica.substack.com. Please subscribe to receive new columns and audios directly to your inbox. We offer free subscriptions, or you may support us with a paid account. At this point, all content is freely available to all, but we definitely always appreciate the financial support if you see the value in our offerings. Also, please give us a like if you enjoy the content, and comments and questions are always welcome and appreciated. Audios are also available now on Substack, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Today's column is our continuing series, The Man Behind the Curtain, Part 5, Understanding the Three Different Orientations of Humanity. The shift in consciousness is very much underway in this time frame. The objective portion of the shift, its insertion into our physical reality, our dimension, began around the turn of the century. For our purposes and in our terms, it has already happened. This is a very important point. The idea isn't how do we insert the shift. The real question is, what do we do with the shift we have inserted? Remember, humanity is not in a vacuum. We are all very much involved in this, and we all chose this as a course of action for ourselves. We may not be objectively aware of doing so, but at other levels we are all quite aware of what we are doing in relation to this action. And in this, we are all, to some extent or another, moving in the direction of asking ourselves, what is different with this new path we have undertaken as the whole of humanity? The first thing is the most obvious, is that we are moving our attention from the outside world and what we can explore or create or invent in that outside world, and we are now turning our focus inward to our inner landscape, what it is that makes us who and what we are. And this is really the scope of this whole series I have called The Man Behind the Curtain. In keeping with that theme, let's look at some basic ideas to get started. We could call this the shift for dummies, and though none of us are dummies, there are some differences in us that are affecting of our perception and will have a bearing on how we ascribe this shift to ourselves. To a degree, I think many of us still believe that everyone is basically the same on the inside. While we accept that people are different in their expressions, we generally only know what we know about our inner landscape from our own perspective, and we think that is fairly uniform from person to person. It is not. There is a basic differentiation that has a tremendous effect on our perception and how we regard ourselves. That is the three orientations of common, soft, and intermediate. To begin our understanding of these orientations, we must first reassess some of our definitions so that when we use various terms, we are beginning on the same page. Firstly, we all know what gender is, but let us define gender in this discussion simply to our physical form and function. There are two genders in those terms, and they only relate to our physical form as humans. They do not relate directly to our expression or our sexuality, although we commonly ascribe various expressions as male and female. But for our purposes, let us say that gender is simply a description of our human form. Next, as I have discussed in previous columns, all of our experience in this physical reality revolves around sexuality and emotion, these being the cornerstones of our exploration. And this is very much related to our orientations of common, soft, and intermediate. Sexuality, then, in these terms, has little or nothing to do with sex. It has to do with our expression, how we be and how we create, and how we interact with our world. Sexuality also has nothing to do with gender. Gender is our physical form and function, and sexuality is our expression. There are no inherent barriers between gender and sexuality, meaning gender is not mutually exclusive to our sexuality. Now, to introduce our orientations. Our orientations are the means through which we interact with our world and how we perceive ourselves. In our manifestational undertaking from Essence, we agree to at least 3 focuses, one for each orientation. The purpose for this is to familiarize ourselves with each means of being. For our orientation is the single most affecting property of our focus. It is how we interact, how we create, how we perceive ourselves and our world. Our orientations can be loosely associated with our genders, but again, are not exclusive. As a starting point, however, we can view them as related to our beliefs of male expression, female expression, and other expression. For an in-depth discussion of these orientations, I have included a link on the transcript to a discussion of this at eliasweb.org. Common is the most common orientation. In any given time frame, common orientation is the most prevalent. It is associated with the male of the species, but it is not limited to the male. Common individuals express and perceive through outside expression. All attention is directed out into the world in the form of the creation of things, which are then perceived through the outer senses. These individuals can be said to produce. With their attention outwardly directed, they have a tendency to see things in black and white, based in logic and reason and verifiable empiric evidence. Evaluation of their emotional expression is not their strong suit. The intermediate orientation could be said to be the polar opposite of common. Again, this is often associated with the female, but it is not limited to the female gender. Intermediates focus their attention inward, favoring the exploration of feelings and emotions in how they interact with our world. Rather than producing objects to be sharing as commons may, intermediates offer themselves and their actions as their sharing. They are focused on their emotions and may use this attention to offer nurturing and support. That is their product, what they offer of themselves. This is how they perceive their world. Intermediates are the least common orientation in any given time frame. The soft orientation can be said to be somewhat of a hybrid of the other 2 orientations, although not exactly. Softs then can be associated with the expression of other, or expressing qualities of the other orientations, but in a significantly different way. This is just a starting point for understanding, however. Softs are very interactive, constantly swirling between inward and outward focus. They create subjectively and experience those creations objectively. Similar to intermediates in inward creation, but varying from intermediates in that inters create inward objectively, but experience outward subjectively. Softs are very expressive, interactive, and passionate. All of this is to say that these 3 orientations are the means by which all of us express and interact and perceive our world, and how we do so differently. This is important because how we perceive is how we create our reality, and how we create our reality has everything to do with how we perceive our reality. In this is important to know as we begin to explore inwardly as part of the shift in consciousness. It has to begin with an understanding of our makeup and how different people perceive differently. It is more than male and female. It is more than our gender. It is more than our sexual preference. A common-oriented individual is considerably different than an intermediate, and a soft individual is different than both of those. As we begin our exploration of our inner landscapes, we have to understand that we are different from each other in ways we have not considered previously. If we want to begin to see and understand our own man behind the curtain, the understanding of these orientations is essential as a baseline in order for us to lay out a path of exploration for ourselves. We need to understand what makes us what we are, what influences how we interact with our world, to help us in our journey to greater self-awareness. And again, this is a bodaciously thin discussion of these orientations, and I have taken certain liberties in my summarizing of them that are not necessarily accurate. The takeaway from this for the reader is that we differ from each other considerably in how we perceive, how we interact, and how we are, based on whichever orientation we chose to explore in this focus. Knowing this, we can lose expectations that what works for one person should work for us as we explore our own subjective. Each one of us will be different, and our orientations will play a large part in those basic differences and what steps we may take in our journey. I encourage you to follow the link in the transcript to eliasweb.org for a more in-depth discussion on the subject. We will continue our discussion of how to acquaint ourselves with our own subjective awareness as part of the shift in consciousness in our next column. Regards, until next time. This has been Philip Mollica's Consciousness Evolution. See you then.